Hi, good day, and you're welcome yet again to another episode of Chill Musings with Mansoor. On this particular episode, we're going to be discussing the topic. The topic is Strait of Hormuz, how Iran enriched itself and its allies and impoverished its adversaries. Broadly, the allies of Iran, particularly with respect to this war, are China and Russia. While the major belligerents, the major adversaries of Iran, particularly with respect to this war, are America, Israel, Europe to some extent, and the Gulf countries that are around Iran, who have allowed America to set up military bases within their territory, and from those military bases are now attacking and threatening Iran. Now, how did Iran, enrich itself and its allies, and then impoverish its adversaries? Remember the Strait of Hormuz. And you remember in the Look Me Less, in the Look Iran Less video, how we discussed and described how Iran has now succeeded in blocking the Strait of Hormuz in a smart way with the anti-ship ballistic missiles, with the surface, sea missiles, supersonic, and with a ship with the explosive laden drone boats. As against the unsmart method America thought Iran relied absolutely on, which was the limpet mines. Now, that smart method that Iran used ensured that Iran could stop the ships they wanted to block, but could allow the ships they wanted to allow to proceed to load oil, gas, urea, food, whatever was ready to be exported and imported. Essentially, free passage for their allies, but blocked route for their adversaries. Let us start from Iran. Do you know that ever since the war started on Saturday, Iran has exported close to 12 to 13 barrels of crude oil. In fact, the Americans and the Israelis are now saying that Iran has exported more oil through the Strait of Hormuz, largely and almost exclusively to China, anyways, than it exported before the war. Imagine Iran exporting more oil during the war than before the war, and essentially making more money from its crude exports during the war compared to before the war, because Iran is now in full control of the Strait of Hormuz. And naturally, they would want to make, first and foremost, benefit from the control of the Strait of Hormuz. Smart control this time. Let's talk about China. Again, China is having all of the enjoyment on the Strait of Hormuz. Why? China is about the only country that Iran is giving unimpeded access on the Strait Hormuz in and out. In fact, some other American and Israeli ships, so that they could trick Iran in letting them pass through the Strait of Hormuz, would change their transponders and start displaying signals such as Chinese vessel, China vessel, trying to deceive the Iranians and pretend that they are Chinese vessels, whereas they are actually American, Israeli, European, or Gulf country vessels. Iran found them out and did not let them pass through. And for those who insisted on passing through and being stubborn, Iran simply sent one of those three smart methods, to them and took those ships out. And every other sailor did what? They calmed down because Iran is now in charge. So that was how China benefited, like Iran did benefit. How did Russia benefit? Remember that Russia is a close ally, strategic ally, business ally, military ally, even diplomatic ally of Iran. How did Russia benefit? Don't forget that in the course of blocking the Strait of Hormuz, Iran had cut off most of 20 million barrels per day, which was 20% of the original 100 million barrels per day that the world consumes of crude oil, which means that there is an oil shock. In fact, the biggest oil shock in the world as of now. The closest to that in previous history was 5.5 million million barrels per day cut off from the global crude basket. Why this time around we are dealing with times four of that, 20 million barrels per day. So suddenly there was a scarcity. There is now been a scarcity of crude oil in the world. That is why the price of international Brent, international crude, is flying up. In fact, that is why in Nigeria, Dangote is now selling at impossibly high prices, 1,240, 1,300 at the pumps, because of the relative scarcity, because 20% of the oil of the world is off the market. Now, because of that, Russia became suddenly the bride that everybody was seeking. Because Gulf oil, 20% is gone. It means that of the 80%, Russia now became an artificially bigger supplier that was not affected, that is not affected by the Gulf oil shock due to the blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. So everybody that has sanctioned Russia before started to immediately unsanctioning them, especially the US. The US that was blocking virtually every country of consequence, India, the Europeans, from buying Russian oil, had to swallow their pride and practically start begging Russia to please start selling. Russia had 130 million barrels of oil on the open seas, on the shadow fleet, untapped, sanctioned. Nobody wanted it because the Americans would be angry. Suddenly, the Americans said, "Don't not just have we unsanctioned the Russian oil that we've blocked you from buying. All of you must go to be buying from the Russians now, because you see, if the Russians do not put their output onto the global oil basket, the price of international crude can only go higher, which is even bigger trouble. Russia is now a micro king of oil in the world. In fact, let me give you an example. Russia used to sell to India at a discount of $24 compared to the international, crude rate before. Now, Russia is selling to India at a $5 premium, $5 higher than the global rate, because Russia is now the bride that everybody wants to do business with. In fact, Putin is now said to be making as much as 150 million to 200 million dollars every day above the usual price, because Iran, so to say, because it is now benefiting from Iran's blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, how are Iran's adversaries losing from the Strait of Hormuz blockage? The first is America. Every time the international price of oil rises, pain at the pumps, like I explained in the previous video, happens in the United States of America. Americans are now buying, petrol, gasoline at the pump for as high as $5 per gallon. And it is putting a very serious political pressure on Trump, because the midterm elections are coming. And like I said, America does not forgive presidents that make them experience pain at the pump. They usually make that president experience pain at the polls, which essentially means that that president will most likely be losing the next election, or his party will be losing the next election. That is how America is paying the price for, through Iran's blockage of the Strait of Hormuz. Why are the Arabs, why are the Gulf countries whose oil has been blocked, and Iran is letting their oil pass, are losing as much as have lost so far collectively as much as $15 billion from projected revenue, because they have not been able to export their oil for the past 2 weeks since Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Again, all of this could only happen because Iran was able to block the Strait of Hormuz in a smart way, unlike America assumed that they only had access to the unsmart way, to block the Strait of Hormuz. Interesting, not so? I will see you in the next episode. As usual, don't forget to like, to share, to follow, to comment, to broadcast. And please ask your questions and I'll gladly answer them. See you in the next episode. Thank you very much.